have some more announcements. We do this monthly, but the exception is December. There's a lot going on here at the winery and in our families and all in December. In fact, I will underline the fact that there's holiday nights. If you're familiar with that event, that goes from Monday the 16th through Saturday the 21st, and they open the winery till 9 o'clock every night. And somebody I know very well will be in here playing a keyboard most of the nights with Christmas music. So please come by and see us. Probably more cookies there. What else? Oh, okay, upcoming events, to get this out of the way now. On Monday, we're going to participate in the Veterans Day ceremony at Webb Park. If you're familiar with the memorial there, the vets do the flag ceremony and some speeches. So if you're around Monday at 10:45, come and see us. We're going to actually sort of feature the wall of honor there. That's the way we have included the vets in the History Heritage Museum. And what else? Okay, that's it. Let me underline. So skip December for this, but then put down January 11th, where we'll welcome Jake Enriquez. He's from the San Diego County Parks Department, and he'll be talking about the creation of Live Oak County Park. So I guess we'll get the inside story on how the park was developed. So today we're privileged to have Steve Willard with us. He has been a police officer from 1985.
Long time.
So 34 years you mentioned. And he's worked in patrol assignments, crime prevention, public affairs, detective, traffic, and management. Man.
Useless bureaucrat.
And what really ties in here neatly is he's the historian for the Police Officers Association history effort, which I guess he'll fill us in on. And he also has a book that he's going to tell us about. So we're very happy to have such a distinguished member of the police force here to fill us in.
Thank you. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for coming out on their Saturday. Can you hear me okay in the back? Okay, great. As I was introduced, I hired you as my PR agent. That sounded pretty good. I'm like, well, I want to know this guy. Anyways, my name is Steve Willard, and I'm a board member of the San Diego Police Museum as well as an author. So I helped establish the San Diego Police Museum in 1996. So we've been around for going on well more than 20 years. But along the way, and this is how I kind of got into writing, I realized that there was not a lot written down about San Diego police history. And love us or hate us, most people have very strong opinions on police, and a lot of it they get from watching television, or driving by, or listening to the neighbors, and when the cops show up over there. But what we wanted to do is tell a very interesting story about the men and women who served the department. We go all the way back to 1889. So I started making notes, I started putting stuff together, and like I said, along the way I've written 4 books. My most recent one is called San Diego Murder and Mayhem, and this one was done a little bit differently, and the idea was I wanted to tell true crime stories from the eyes of the detectives who investigated it. Out of the 34 years I've been on the police department, 27 of them have been in investigations. Mostly in robbery, working robberies, commercials, bank robberies, kidnappings, extortions, some pretty heavy-duty stuff, meeting some heavy-duty criminals. But along the way I realized we're not getting a lot of this put down. We need to tell this story. So that's really how my writing has came about. That's really what our museum is about. Our website is sdpolicemuseum.com. If you want to visit that, there's 2,500 pages, so if you got nothing to do for the next 7 years, feel free. But, and then there's my website as well if you want to see some of the other stuff that I've done. I kind of say I was doomed to this profession. My father was the chief of police who did 44 years in law enforcement, and my grandfather was the fire chief. I decided a long time ago I'm scared to death of fire, so I'll probably go into something a little less dangerous in that regard. So we've actually lived in San Diego since 1977, so that's my original father. I moved out with the stepdad. So I was telling Mr. Leitner here, I remember most of you probably do as well, when Rancho Bernardo was its own community and it took a while to get here. Same with Penasquitas is where I lived, and then Penasquitas even separated from the city. Now it all kind of blends together. And it's interesting because if anyone was to ask me, well, do you know any crime history in Rancho Bernardo? I'd have to say no. And that's probably a good thing, okay? Because if I said, oh yeah, there's a murder over there, 10 people got killed over there, and they found, you know, some skeletons in the canyon, you don't want that kind of history. So, but anyways, so that's a little bit about me. Okay. Some of the writing I've done too, I was a writer for the Informant magazine for almost 16 years, and that's a publication of San Diego Police Officers Association. I've also been featured in the Dallas Morning News, and then since 1999, I'm a quarterly columnist for the Law Enforcement Quarterly, which is a magazine published for district attorneys and things like that. So my audience is very narrowly focused, so the books kind of branch out more in that regard. I left writing for The Informant due to some artistic differences, mainly illness and fatigue. They got sick and tired of me. But now what happened was they just wanted to be much more pointed on San Diego police history, and I was more expanding into regular crime history. Is anybody here a crime buff, true crime buff? You like watching Forensic Files? Or? Yeah. Okay, great, yeah. And by the way, like I said, I want this to be an interactive thing. If you have questions, ask me questions. There's only one question I don't want you asking, it's how much money I make. How do you tell the IRS that kind of info? But beyond that, believe me, everything is fair game. And by the way, it's okay to laugh at my stupid jokes. If these are good jokes, you'd bought tickets for this. But the Crime Files is on my website as well, and it's one of the pages on there. And it's an online archive of true crime, dumb criminals, and forgotten history. So there's some pretty interesting stuff in there. I'm kind of fascinated on presidential history. So one of the things I just wrote about, maybe a wine drinker since we're at a winery, was a story about a guy who, everybody heard of the Koch brothers? They're political activists. There's a lesser known Koch brother who's not politically active, but he's a wine collector. He collects vintage wine, and he got scammed out of 4 bottles of what he thought was Thomas Jefferson's private reserve. He bought each of these bottles was $175,000. He got burned for 40. So he spent $35 million tracking down the guys who did it. That story along the way. But it's kind of interesting, and I was thinking, how diabolically clever is this? Because wine collectors will buy the bottle, they'll buy the label, they don't drink the wine. So they found a guy who was literally counterfeiting labels, putting them on a bottle, $2 Chuck, and selling them for $200,000 a piece. That guy's now in prison, by the way. And I often say the smartest criminals are not the ones who are not caught, they're the ones who are never detected. They're doing who the heck knows what. These are my books here, and it's kind of interesting how this whole thing got started because, like I said, I was with the museum, I was putting a lot of notes together, and I had this grand idea. I'm going to write this big book, and I'm going to publish it, and everybody's going to love it. Well, a few things are wrong there. But that's the book in 2007. When I started shopping around for an agent to find a publisher, they said, well, we found a publisher, but they want a book with more pictures and less text. I was like, well, that's going to require me rewriting the book. So I did. And then ultimately it came out as Images of America in 2005. Another publisher learned about that book, so I published the one I always wanted in 2007. And then in 2012 I did another one. This one is still in production, No Statutes for Murder. And it's a novel based upon an unsolved murder of a police detective in 1927 in Bowell Park. For those of you who like to surf around on YouTube, if you Google San Diego Police Museum, we have a YouTube channel there as well. And our most recent release is on that detective, the true life version of what happened. And again, it happened 72 years ago, so that will be an unsolved forever. Okay, so this is the most recent book here. And like I said, I wanted to tell the story from the eyes of the detectives, but I also wanted to do it pre-World War II. And the reason I said pre-World War II is today we all watch Forensic Files, everything is DNA, and I was 18 years as a crime scene investigator, but the truth is I can't even spell DNA. So I wanted to get something more rudimentary as to how they used to do it old school. And it was more than just taking in your known suspects and grabbing a phone book. It had a lot to do with identification, it had to do a lot with hunches, and quite frankly, a lot of dogged determination to get the job done. So the first chapter of the book, by the way, the books are back here. I have 11 of them for sale. If anybody buys one, you'll double my retail sales. So, but hopefully, for those of you who appreciate this kind of stuff, you'll get a real good appreciation of what old San Diego was like. How many of you have been to the Lower Gaslamp, the Stingery District, south of Market? Okay. At one time, that was probably one of the worst areas along the West Coast, south of San Francisco. Well, actually, given some of the stuff going on, it might still be today. But the truth is, at that time, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were brothels, there were opium dens, there were gangs, and all kinds of stuff that you might not associate with, quote, the good old days. But there was a lot of crime. Well, at the time, the chief of police said, we're going to clean this stuff up. And as noble as that might sound, he kind of had an uphill battle because, quite frankly, some of the city leaders, the mayor, city council members, district attorney, all owned property down in that area, which were leasing as brothels and opium dens and all kinds of other illegal gambling saloons and things like that. So he found himself up against a stone wall. But he said, you know what, right is right, and I got to do what's right. So he went in and he raided the brothels. He arrested all the women. But rather than put them in jail, this is something, I saw your thing back there, no human trafficking. This is something that 100 years ago nobody else did. But he pulled all the women in and he said, look, I don't know if you're in this for profit or if you're in this because you're being held against your will. I'm going to give you two choices. Either you can leave town, renounce your ways, and go live a new life, or you're going to get put in jail. Most of them left. Some of them went back into doing what they were doing. But that was unheard of back in the day. So again, this was over 100 years ago. Unfortunately, Keno Wilson paid a heavy price for that because by 1917 he was fired after his protector in City Hall died. But one of the other things he did, and this is articulated in the book as well, in 1915 he hired a detective and a state health inspector to go through there and close them down on health code violations versus just strict law enforcement. He wasn't getting any traction with the law enforcement. So when he did that though, the detective's name was Reginald Townsend, and Reginald Townsend was black in 1915. Now, Major League Baseball brags, hey, we had Jackie Robinson, first black player in 1947. Jackie Robinson wasn't even born until 1918, and here we have a black detective. And guess what? He wasn't the first black lawman in San Diego. That one came in 1850. So we go back a long way doing the right thing with diversity and inclusion and things like that. And by the way, we hired our first policewoman in 1915 as well. And for those historians in the room, what did women not have the right to do until 1920? Yeah, that was kind of a remarkable thing. And some of the way the world existed for those women is women are not allowed to go into bars either. And yet they were told to be dance hall inspectors. So as you well imagine, that wasn't what we're seeing. This one actually turned out to be a pretty fascinating chapter. It's called Los Fugitivos. This is about an individual. One of the challenges, who was murdered, one of the challenges I had when I was putting this all together was in looking at old police reports, making references to things and figuring out, does that place still exist? This was talking about being out in the remote area past Mount Hope. And I'm going, Mount Hope, that's in the middle of the city. Well, 1918, it wasn't. So that was one of the interesting things. And the other thing, too, is it referenced, and this is Reginald Townsend, by the way, and then his partner is Joe Myers. It referenced, they made a lot of trips back and forth from San Diego to El Centro, where the fugitives actually took off and killed the jitney driver. And I was thinking, they're referring to this taking all day. Why does it take all day to go to El Centro? It takes me, 45 minutes. Okay, most people drive the speed limit, it takes them 2 hours. But you get what I'm saying. But then I was thinking, okay, well the cars weren't as fast. But then I realized neither was the road. The road was literally a plank road. And it was one lane, just all the way there. And if somebody's coming the other way, you had to pull over in the sand, dig your way up, get back on the road and keep going. So there was a lot of challenges these individuals faced. And these are the two suspects here. It took them almost a year to catch these guys. And they took off down into Mexico, and Joe Myers decided in El Centro, I'm going into Mexico after these guys. And the sheriff there said, no, you're not. I'm not going to let you do it. Now keep in mind, in 1918, this is 2 years after Pancho Villa. This is not going to be a welcoming thing for an American lawman to go into Mexico. And certainly, guess what? Guns are illegal in Mexico now. They were illegal in Mexico then. We cannot have an American lawman entering Mexico unarmed. I'm sorry, armed. So he said, if you're going to go, you're leaving your weapon here, but I'll give you a Mexican detective from my police department in El Centro to go with you. And they spent several months down in Mexico on horseback, going through these towns, looking for these guys. It talks about some of the challenges that they had. And one of them was where are you going to get a regular meal? Joe Myers, prior to going to Mexico, weighed about 300 pounds. He weighs about 190 there. So he lost a significant amount of weight. But it's literally a true tale of how somebody did not give up until they caught their person. So, like I said, that's the longest chapter in the book, but it's kind of a fascinating tale of how things were, certainly more than 100 years ago. This next one, and unfortunately murderers go back a long way, and this one may have a strange tie-in to that case I mentioned, the detective being murdered in Balboa Park. Because when we filmed the YouTube segment very recently, one of the first people who's been very immersed in that case mentions that one of the possible suspects was a guy named Cree in 1927. Jack Cree was a suspect in a murder in 1918. So was that the same guy? Well, now we got another mystery going on. For those of you who do history, you probably know, you get on one path, all of a sudden you go down this rabbit hole, then another one, you forget totally where you even started from. That's what this whole thing's been about. This occurred down on 426 6th Avenue downtown. The hotel is still there. So when I went out looking around to try to find some of these sites, it was very interesting to see it was still there. In some cases, in its original footprint as well. The numbers had been changed in the hotel, so it took me a while to find room 9. But I went in there and I looked around. I could see exactly how it went because they described finding a female's body on the floor, and all they had were heavy footsteps going down the staircase and out into the street. They were also able to figure out who they were, and this involves Joe Myers as well. So along the way with these stories, hopefully you get an appreciation for the men who investigated them as well. Because again, they didn't have forensics, they didn't have DNA, so a lot of it was just, again, dogged determination. So all of these cases are solved, by the way, and all these are true. One of the things when I wanted to do this, the publisher said, well, I don't really want you publishing names of people involved. I go, they're dead. But it's probably, if you really want stuff from the pages of police blotters, from police reports, from archives, this is going to be as close as you're going to get to it, because this is where all it came from. And that's one of the things that I've been afforded the luxury of, is having access to vast archives information. We have 75,000 photographs in our police museum, and we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of old police reports. So that's how this was put together. This was kind of an interesting one as well. There was a Chinese spice vendor down in Chinatown. Has anybody been to San Diego Chinatown? No. Well, you can stand at one end and throw a football down and go past the other end. It's not very big. Unfortunately, development's kind of squeezed out. There are still some remnants there, including the shop where this man was murdered. At that time, as you can well imagine, racism being what it was, Chinese were not viewed as equal citizens, unfortunately. But what our chief of police did at the time was said, you know, we're not going to have murders down in these communities. I'm going to assign 4 detectives to figure out who did this. That was remarkable for the time, because normally you got 2 and sometimes you just got 1. So we really did put a lot of effort into solving this, because SDPD wanted to build a connection with an immigrant community. And unfortunately, you still hear it today, you know, SDPD doesn't bond well with the community. I'm quite frankly, knowing the history, I'm deeply offended by that, because I feel like telling people, look, read history, you'll see what you're saying is patently false. You flat out don't know what you're talking about. Anyways, along the way, of course, they've discovered gambling, opium, and things like that, but they solved the case literally by going into an apartment where they thought a suspect was going to be. They can't figure out where he's at. The guy leans against the wall, and a whole secret panel opens up, and all kinds of clues, and even some of the missing money was found inside of that. These are the suspects here. Unfortunately, prison records being what they are, which is non-existent, I wasn't able to find out what happened to these individuals. Back in that time, though, 1920, murder, they probably either got 1 year or they were hung. There didn't seem to be a lot of differences in between how California justice was meted out.
Question?
Yes, sir.
You can go first.
Oh, go ahead.
Where is Chinatown?
It's down 4th and Island. 4th and Island, 5th and Island. There's a Chinese historical museum right there. And there's a couple little warehouses. If you look, you can still see Chinese writing and things. But literally, it's only about a block and a half. So you have to really know it.
That was my question.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't have the same one that we have in San Francisco. One of the job I do now is I work in the police department's domestic violence unit, and I track domestic violence murders. And unfortunately, domestic violence murders go back hundreds and hundreds of years, and this one occurred in 1920. And this one was kind of a challenge, and I'm not entirely exactly sure where she was found. That's the murder victim there. Her name is Mrs. Flash, Edna, is it? Yeah, Edna Flash. And she was found in a shallow grave in Mission Valley, and a cattle rancher smelled it, and then went and got the police, and they ultimately dug her up. And what's interesting is that they figured out probably the husband would have been the suspect, which is normal in the case like that. They go to interview him, and his story's all over the place as to where his wife was. She's out in Arizona on a sabbatical, things like that. So they really start pressing it out a bit harder. But then they started looking around hardware stores and finding out, has anybody bought a shovel? And then a guy remembered, yeah, I remember this weird guy bought a shovel and he didn't know how to use it. Anyways, and if you don't know how to use a shovel, don't tell the guy at the hardware store you don't. Anyways, but yeah, so it was a guy and his incompetence with a shovel that ultimately led us to figure out who killed Edna Mae Flash. So I don't want to give away more of the book for those of you reading. Oh, that's not a surprise.
Quick question.
Yes.
Does that mean she did some bad stuff first because you got a mugshot?
She's arrested for vagrancy. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. But yeah. And up until the 60s, vagrancy was actually a crime. If you're sitting on the street and you have no purpose, why you go to the Graveyard Hotel. So imagine what that would look like today. And you know, one of the things too is we look to the past to kind of figure out what do people do in the past that would successfully solve things in the future. This one absolutely would not work, but I found a thing in 1947 talking about in California, they'd round up derelicts who were mentally ill and give them lobotomies. I was like, okay, that'll fix that. So, needless to say, that will not be coming back. So they're looking for other solutions. This is one, and this gun, by the way, is in the San Diego Police Museum, and you can't see it, but engraved on there is from the chief of detectives to the sergeant who arrested the black and white bandits. And these were a trio of robbers, 2 white men and a black man, who were out doing robberies, not only in San Diego, but also in Los Angeles. And at the time, San Diego had no unsolved bank robberies. So this is kind of a big deal if somebody robbed a bank and got away with it. So what we would do is, because San Diego wasn't all that big, we'd literally close off the north exit, the east, and then of course the south of Mexico, and to the west was the ocean. So there wasn't a lot of places for robbers to go, and when they did, we would just kind of literally close in the dragnet until we found them. These guys are pretty slippery. They were renting cars, and they were switching cars, and how a black and white trio was able to slip through all white neighborhoods, to this day I don't know that, I'll never know that. But they bounced back and forth for almost 3 years. They made their mistake at 30th University. There was a Bank of America there. They went in to rob it, and this is where it gets kind of funny. On the way out, they had robbed it before, so the bank manager said, I've had enough of this. He grabs a rifle, he starts shooting at one of the robbers. Well, there's a policeman across the street in the call box. He sees it, hey, that's not right. He starts shooting at them. There's a guy in a car, he gets shot, and he jumps out, and he starts shooting at the robbers as well. And as the robbers are going down the street, people are coming out of their businesses, and they're cranking off rounds. How these guys got away without getting turned into Swiss cheese is beyond me. Anyways, ultimately, we figured out, okay, they're not going too far, so they tracked them down to a house up in Logan Heights. And actually went over and saw the house, and it's interesting because in the police reports describe exactly the way the house looks today. It's fenced off behind a metal gate now, and there's a pit bull bigger than me who was jumping up and down over the fence. And I was looking at him, he's going like this. So I go, I'm not going in there. So anyways, but the house is still there, but it describes the detectives going up to the door, and we would never do this today, but they went up to the door, knocked on the door, the robber answered the door, the detective grabbed him, threw him out. That guy was arrested, he charged in, there was a guy with a shotgun. He had the shotgun pointed right at the chest of our sergeant. Our sergeant's a gun pointed at him. Now we got a standoff. He ultimately grabbed the rifle and pointed it upwards and then arrested the guy, and then they got the third guy in the back room. And it's interesting because our chief of detectives who interviewed the robbers asked one of them, why did you follow this guy into a life of crime? And he said, up until I met that detective, that was the bravest man I'd ever met. So I would say crazy because he's lucky he didn't get himself killed. But again, that's what we had. We did not have a SWAT team, which kind of leads into this next part here. And for those of you, have you ever been down to Petco Park? You see the big building that says Sholey Brothers Candy Factory? That was the active candy factory in the 20s, and it was one of San Diego's biggest businesses, but the Sholey brothers lived up in Mission Hills on Sunset Drive. One morning, the little boy who's in the house, 6 years old, hears a ring at the doorbell, answers the door, and there's this hulking man standing on the porch. He said, I'm here to see Eula. He's up there. So Eula was the maid. So he goes storming in the house, goes right up into the bedroom where Eula was taking care of Mrs. Sholey, and he shoots her in the chest. Mrs. Sholey jumps up and runs out, grabs the little boy, and runs out of the house. Well, there just happened to be a constable going by at the time, and he realized what's going on. So now there's a gunfight between the guy in the house and the officer outside. Ultimately, we had a number of officers respond, and they wound up in the house. And at one point, the chief of police had a Browning automatic rifle, boom, 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 shooting into the first floor ceiling, and you could hear the guy running around on the second floor trying to dodge the bullets. At one point, it got quiet, so our chief of detectives, this guy's name is Paul Hayes, and just for some perspective, in 1910, the average man is about 5'9". Paul Hayes, our chief of detectives, is 6'6", so he's a very big man. And it describes Paul Hayes as yelling up to the top of the stairs of the government, "What are you doing?" And the guy yells back, "Praying." So ultimately, one of our sergeants we did rescue the maid. She actually lived, thankfully. But one of our sergeants went up into the second floor. He did not know where this guy was at. And he's armed with a fire axe. I have no idea why he was carrying an axe and not a shotgun. But he figured out the guy's in the closet, so he chops a hole in the wall. And then he's looking at this guy, and the guy's looking at him, and then the guy runs out of the closet, and they shoot it out, and ultimately the bad guy was killed, the officers were not hurt. When I went to take pictures of the house up in Mission Hills, the owner of the house came up and goes, "What are you doing?" And I told him, he goes, "Oh, I know them, come on in." He invites me in the house, he showed me, "Look, there's some bullet holes." So, and he had a little shrine put together of all of the shootout back then. We did not have a SWAT team until the 60s, and this was one of the times we actually probably would have needed one, but at that time, you kind of literally had to figure it out as you went. And then, anybody recognize this building? It's now 4th and C. It's called the California Theater. Those of you might belong to, anybody belong to SOHO, this preservationist group? Yeah. SOHO has been working to save that building from demolition. At one time, it was a very elegant theater. In its heyday, it was probably one of San Diego's nicest theaters. Anyways, the manager up there was counting the money in one of the upper rooms. A guy goes up and he shoots and kills him and then takes off. And it took us 5 years to solve that case. And it was literally solved on a fluke. If this guy had not decided to be a shoplifter in Utah, and he had a sheriff who was paying attention to be on the lookout flyers coming out from other agencies, he never would have got caught. He ultimately, though, led us on a chase. He shot one of our police officers as well. So a very, very dangerous individual, and very little clues as to who he was. We didn't have a full grasp of what fingerprints were. We certainly didn't have an ability to get a fingerprint at a crime scene or run it through any type of computer system that we would do today. So, like I said, it took 5 years to solve that case. And then this is kind of San Diego growing up. Agua Caliente, everyone familiar with that? It's still there, the Agua Caliente Casino. 2 couriers were taking a delivery of cash, $80,000 in cash. In 1929, I figured out it's about 1.3 million, about 1.5 million dollars in today's money. This is a lot of money. And as they're driving out past National City into San Diego, a car pulls up alongside them, a guy on the running board with a fully automatic Tommy gun, and just riddles the car with bullets. As the car comes to a stop, they jump off, they shoot the 2 guys in the car, and then they take off into North Park area, Golden Hill. So somebody finds a key, said, "I think this key belongs to a car," and we actually, with the key, we're able to start connecting the dots. When I was out photographing locations on this as well, it was interesting because I was outside the apartment, same thing that happened in Mission Hills. A girl comes in and goes, "What's going on?" I said, "Oh, we have some guys hide out from a robbery in 1992. "Really?" So she invites me into the house. So by the way, if you ever want to break into somebody's house, don't go through the window, just start taking pictures because I'm going to tell you a story as to how the house is involved in history. Thankfully, I'm one of the good guys. But this was really put San Diego on the map. Chicago had been dealing with this stuff for a while with the Al Capone era and Prohibition. San Diego was largely insulated from that, and Prohibition as well. In the 20s, when everybody wanted to drink in Chicago, there weren't a lot of places to get it. San Diego, you simply drove into Tijuana. There wasn't a border. If there wasn't much of one, and people would kind of come and go as they went. As he got further north into California, there were more liquor issues and more violence with it because it's farther from the border. So we did encounter a lot of rum runners and things like this, but this was something we had never seen before.
Now this happened on what's currently National City Boulevard.
You know what, it's kind of vague as to where exactly it happened. It just describes a road north from National City into San Diego. It might be probably, given that National City Boulevard is the main corridor and it's the oldest, and it would have connected with the border, but I don't know that for a fact. And that's the other thing too, and this is what will drive me nuts, is when I first started writing all of this, I found some great stories, and then they just died. I couldn't figure out where it went after that. I found one about a little boy who was 6 years old. He's found floating in the bay, and it looked like he had been murdered by a serial killer. And everybody in town was going crazy, demanding that we find this crazy sex fiend. The newspaper is storing all these headlines, San Diego police murders, and so on and so forth. Turns out none of them were related, and this little boy accidentally drowned. So, but it took me months to literally figure this out. And the sheriffs, I hate to say this, the sheriffs solved the case on a cold case in 2007 with modern forensics, when in 1933 SDPD was insisting that it was a murder, and the media was trying to link it to other murders. And by the way, that actually reminds me, one of the cases linked in that 1933 case was a case involving an individual who was shot on the north end of Lake Hodges, so which would now be up in Escondido area. And they, for the longest time, thought that it might have been a guy named Gerhard Cordes who killed him. Gerhard Cordes is actually a San Diego police officer. They put him on trial and he's found not guilty. He actually demanded his job back, and they said, "Okay, well, I guess we got to give you your job back." He actually later, 4 years later, was on the beat, went into a woman's house, slashed her throat, and then later he killed a woman with an ice pick in Texas. So he was a bad guy. So now, everybody knows the double jeopardy, right? If you're acquitted, you can't be retried for the crime. So the reason he was acquitted in 1933 of that murder is they never found a murder weapon. Well, in the 50s, along comes a drought, and Lake Hodges goes down, they find a gun. And they run the serial number of the gun, which was they determined had killed the individual they found 20 years earlier. And the serial number came back stolen from a police locker at headquarters. So Gerhard Cordes did that too. He's a really, really rotten name. Yeah, that one, you know, like I said, that's how I kind of stumbled onto that, was just hearing his name connected with other stuff. And, you know, who knows? This case, again, we go back to domestic violence murders. This is a case where it happened in reverse. The woman was the murderer, the male was the victim. And this turned into a case where the man, she said, was sick and he ultimately died. He died of gas asphyxiation, but somehow she miraculously didn't. Okay, that right there is suspicious. But we didn't really have enough to pin on her until she started drinking. And everybody heard this tale, loose lips sink ships, and sunk hers, because she started confessing to the murder. And one of the interesting things about this is I went out looking for the site, and in the police report it describes a series of cottages, like courtyard cottages, where you have one here, one here, one here, and like that. Anyways, the address that the murder occurred in is still there. The rest of the cottages are gone. So one house out of 5 or 6, and wouldn't you know, that's the one where it happened. The other interesting thing about this, at the time she was sentenced to life in prison, the judge says, what do you think you're going to do with your time behind bars? She goes, well, I used to like to read detective magazines. I don't think I will anymore. Good irony there. Everybody remember the Night Stalker in the 1980s up in Los Angeles area? I call this guy the original Night Stalker because he was prowling San Diego in 1932. Now, fortunately, he was not near as vicious as Richard Ramirez. He wasn't a murderer, but the guy was definitely a weirdo. And this guy was as bold as they come. It started out where a couple was sleeping, and again, in the 30s, a lot of people left their windows and doors unlocked. The windows are open, it's hot, there's no air conditioning. He wouldn't go into the house. He'd come to the window, he'd shine a light in the bedroom and have a gun, say, hand me your wallet, hand me your money, and he would take off. That made him really hard to catch. Although he did rob the house of a Marine officer, and the Marine officer went out the window, I don't know what he was wearing at the time, but actually chased this guy shooting at him. Now, most people probably would have said, okay, I quit, I'm not going to do this anymore. He kept going. Well, the police department was so annoyed with this guy, we said, okay, you know what, we're going to start putting police cars into the area. One of the things we did not have a lot of were police radios at the time. This is 1932. Today we have two-way communication. We can talk to one another wherever we're at. Up until the 70s, we didn't have portable radios. Everything was wired into the car. But in 1932, there were one-way radios, just like you have in your car today, and there were only 5 of them across the city. So we moved them all into one area, and we were dispatching as fast as we could go. But this guy, you would have people on this end of the block, officers taking a report, and he's hitting at the other end of the block. He seemed to get a thrill out of having really close calls. He made the mistake one night, though, trying to break into a tamale factory down in Old Town, on the north end of Old Town, and the owner shot him. He staggered out and ran through the neighborhood, and when I was reading where he ran, I was going, wait a minute, that street doesn't exist anymore. How many people live in San Diego more than 50 years? Remember before Interstate 8 was there? So yeah, well that took out a whole neighborhood in Old Town on Whitman Street. There's, I think it stops down about 2100. There was a 4,000 block, so it went down into the valley. And Interstate 8 just took it out, so that neighborhood is completely gone. But this guy was really kind of a, well, he's more than kind, he was definitely a weirdo. And they found some interesting secrets about him when they got him to the morgue as well. That's in the book. Of all the senseless murders around, and they're mostly all senseless, this one was probably off the charts. There was involved a guy who was found dead in a room in a hotel. And it's interesting because we would never do this today, but they were bringing known suspects into the room with the dead guy still there. Did you do this? And to see the guy's reaction. Again, that's not something we do today, but they didn't have a lot to work with either. Ultimately, they did figure out who did this. The guy called the police and turned himself in. They bring him in and said, and started interrogating him, and he said that the reason why he was using the Navy, things were not going so well. He thought he was going to be dishonorably discharged, and he just wanted to see what it would feel like to kill somebody. So, again, stone cold killer. And unfortunately, again, prison records being what they are, I wasn't able to figure out what happened to him, but he said, I want the gallows. I want you to hang me. That's what the ultimate goal is. And up until 1941, California did hang people instead of the gas chamber. Now they die of old age on death row. But believe it or not, up until the 60s, California led the United States for executions. So it is a whole different world that if people went in for capital murder, they often were executed for it. This one is a very strange one as well. They're all kind of strange. And this happened in an area that's no longer there, over on 18th Street. Interstate 5 now goes through it. But a lady named Laura Straw, her remains were found bundled up and floating in San Diego Bay. She had been chopped up. So it took a while to kind of figure out who she was. And once we did, we started looking back as to who could possibly be involved in this. We found her house, got into her house, found some clues talking about an individual named Tommy. So we said, okay, now who is Tommy? Is Tommy a victim or is Tommy a suspect? We ultimately put two and two together, figured out Tommy was a suspect. That was not his real name. His real name was Telly McQuaid, and he was on parole from Ohio. He was in the wind. We couldn't figure out where he went until a few days later. Some officers in Los Angeles saw a guy sitting in a park, looked like he was a derelict, so they approached him. He couldn't quite answer up what he was doing there, and then they found some other evidence on him that led them to believe he's probably involved in some more activity than he's letting on to. And ultimately, they did call us. We went up there, and same thing. And it's interesting in some of these trials. And one of the cases not in there, the publisher absolutely would not touch a case involving sexual assault, was of a rape. Is there any lawyers in the room here, by the way? Okay. I think this justice system moved quickly, and there weren't a lot of them around. But what happened was this guy was a rapist. He was 16 years old, so we're dealing with a juvenile. They bring this guy into court on Monday. The judge goes, do you have a lawyer? No. Do you want one? No. Proceed. So picked a jury, had him tried, convicted, and sentenced by Friday. It was all over done, 1 week. So, and this kind of happened the same thing here. Telly McQuaid was tried and convicted within 1 week, and then a few months later went up to San Quentin. 13 steps up the gallows, and they hung him there. So,
and the whole story about him is there as well.
one of the other things I wanted to put through there was, like I said, I wanted people to see through the eyes of the individuals involved. So this is the individuals who are involved. Keena Wilson was the chief of police from 1909 to 1917. And he's the one, like I said, who's really credited with hiring women, hiring black officers. He also hired Chinese officers. You may recognize the name Florence Chadwick.
Yes.
That's her dad. So he was a policeman. He's heavily involved in the book as well as a detective. Joe Lopez was one of our best detectives of the area. He's literally known as San Diego's best homicide detective. Jack Berg is the one who was chasing around the Night Stalker. And then George Sears was chief of police in the 1930s, but he was also a detective in the Chinatown, and he was heavily involved with a lot of those early cases as well. Mike Shea is the individual who's either the bravest or the dumbest man alive who stormed into that house and faced down the shotgun. John Cloud is black. He was one of our first black sergeants. He's a black detective as well. And this is one of the things I really had to tone it down. And you want to talk about racism? I blame the media on some of this stuff. Because it was talking about a black suspect being involved in those bank robberies and said, the police department is going to have one of their own kind track this gorilla down. I'm going, are you kidding? I mean, we wouldn't have it today. But you can imagine now, if they're able to publish that in the 30s and the 20s, why weren't people demanding people's head on a stick? It was a different world. This is Hugh Rochefort. He was one of the detectives involved. Well, this is Paul Shea, who was 6'6". I found some references to Paul Shea, was a very skilled interrogator. So I actually tracked down his grandson. He goes, oh yeah, he goes, I knew my granddad. He got confessions out to everybody. He'd take him up to the Pickwick Hotel, grab him by the necktie, and hold him out over the street. Don't talk! I would talk. I'd tell you anything you want to know. Harry Kelly was the chief of police in 1939 for a very short period of time, but he did most of his police work in the detective bureau as well. And he was the chief of detectives in 1943, but prior to that, he was involved in almost every single one of those cases, including the straw killing, and he canceled his vacation to work it, and he did not stop until the case was solved. This guy, Ed Diekman here, looks as much like a detective as you would expect a detective to look. But of all this group here, and some of them are muscle guys, I'm not going to lie to you about that, Mike Shea, certainly Paul Hayes, Ed Diekman is probably the most cerebral of all. And if anybody would be responsible for that book being written, it would be Ed Diekman, because if it wasn't for his notes, none of this would have existed. Ed Diekman did a lot of note-taking, a lot of writing, and one of the things that I did when I was putting this whole thing together is everything was flatlined. You know, I did this, I said that, he said this, he said that. Like, I'm gonna give these guys some life. So when I put in there, you know, he kicked the ground in frustration or something like that, that's me sort of hypothesizing how the case would have been just from my own perspective or those that I know. But Ed Diekman actually put in there, I was seriously frustrated with this. The guy, I was getting nowhere. You know, I got up and stormed around the room. So he really, it was kind of the glue that made a lot of these stories connect together. And then Tom Remington, this is kind of cool. Remington's partner was Winchester. For those of you who I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. But Tom Remington was involved in that chase, a murder at the California Theater. And then Hugh Rochefort was on that as well. It's hard to cover all of this without spilling the beans. I don't need to buy the book, everything I just heard. So are there any questions about anything about the book or just, about San Diego Police Department history in general? Yes.
Can you tell us anything about Wyatt Earp when he was
Yeah, it's a great question.
lawman in San Diego?
He wasn't a lawman in San Diego, but and Wyatt Earp's an interesting fellow because he lived long enough. He died in 1929. He lived long enough to kind of meet some Hollywood types like Tom Mix and sort of spin his own lore. It turns out Wyatt Earp was a lawman in Dodge City, Kansas, but when he went to Tombstone, Arizona, which I think most people kind of associate him with, and he got involved in the gunfight at OK Corral. After that, he left town because he had been indicted for murder. So he blew into San Diego probably 1887, and to give you a snapshot of what San Diego was like, in 1880, San Diego had 3,000 people, in 1887 they had 40,000. So we had a real estate boom. Houses were selling for well over $1,000 for, can you imagine? But by 1893, the San Diego population was 5,000, and they were giving houses away. So all of this stuff has been going on for a long time, that boom and bust. Anyways, Wyatt Earp came into town. He became good friends with a guy named Joe Coyne, who was the city marshal, who later became San Diego's first chief of police. And he ran a saloon, and we had looked at that angle for a long time. If he was a lawman, we're going to get a lot of mileage out of this. And he just wasn't. He was like this with the city marshal, and he probably ran the marshal's gambling interests. But one of the things was kind of the nail in the Wyatt Earp legend of being a lawman was we found a complaint written by a city marshal named Josh Campbell. And Campbell wrote, I'm not going to this Earp saloon alone because the last time I did, he said, the next time you cops come in here, you'll be stepping into your casket. So I don't know that he would be considered really pro-police. But yeah, he was in San Diego for about 5 years, I think. But yeah, he was not a San Diego lawman, unfortunately.
And you mentioned that SDPD has been around since like 1889.
1889, yeah.
Now before that, was the county sheriff in the law?
Great question. Yeah, what happened was going back to 1850 when San Diego was part of California, which still is, and California became part of the Union and therefore an American territory, or American state. San Diego had a city marshal and they had a county sheriff. They actually happened to be the same guy. His name was Agustin Harsasy. And they knew, for those of you who lived here a long time, remember Harsasy Street? That was the one street you probably didn't want to live on because nobody could spell it or pronounce it. Agustin Harsasy was a Hungarian count, and he was the city marshal. But he did something very remarkable in he did a couple things. In 1850, San Diego had $10,000 in its treasury, and he said, I will be the city marshal. I don't think it hurt that his father was a city attorney, and he had a brother on the city council, so he selected. And out of that $10,000 treasury, he was paid a salary of $1,000 a year in 1850. That's a darn good living. He was already a very rich Hungarian count when he came here, so he didn't necessarily need the money, but he wanted to establish a wine industry more than he ever wanted to be a lawman. But he hired an individual named Richard Freeman, or his name may have been pronounced Freeman, and he was a black former slave in 1850, 13 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. That's pretty darn remarkable. Anyways, Agustin Harsasy went before the city council and he said, I need to build a jail. We need to house these miscreants, because before that you had two choices. You could be run out of town or you could be shot. Those are really your two choices. Sometimes they'd chain you to a log until you wanted to leave town. But there wasn't really any type of modern justice we consider today. So the city gave $5,000 out of that $10,000 plus this $1,000 salary. So he's in there for $6 grand to build a jail. He builds it down in Old Town out of mud, brick, and straw. It rains, the jail melted. So he went back to the city council. I'm sure it had nothing to do with relatives on the council. And he said, I need money to rebuild the jail. So he gave him $2,000 more. So now he's into, what's that, $8,000 out of 10? He builds a jail again. He arrests a 25-year-old brother of the mayor named Flanty Bean. You might know the story. Flanty Bean also is known by the name of Roy Bean, who later became Judge Roy Bean. Right. He was booked into jail for dueling. He was there about 24 hours. He dug his way out the spoon and took off, went up to Los Angeles, became a member of the LA Rangers. That was the one and only person that San Diego City Jail's ever held. In response to all of this, San Diego went bankrupt. So a few years ago, when they were talking about the city of San Diego may go bankrupt, I'm going, please don't. You'll be the only one to ever do it twice. So not a good badge of honor to wear around your neck. Agustin Harsasy later went on to become the sayer of the San Francisco Mint. And when he's up there, he's involved in a controversy. There was some missing gold. And when they started looking back as to where it all went, he said, well, obviously when we're melting, it all went up the chimney in smoke. So Good story. Later, he went to Napa and formed the Buena Vista Winery. And for those of you who've ever drank Zinfandel wine, that is his creation. So if you go up to that area now, Napa, Sonoma, you'll see Buena Vista Winery. Since the Count is back, they have a whole museum on Agassiz Marcy, and that's where he got his start as a city marshal. So we had city marshals prior to SDPD, and up until 1879, they ran the city, and then in 79, the city said, this is costing us too much, we'll disband the police, we don't need them, and we'll just have the sheriff. Well, the population boomed by 85, so we need to have police back again. So we started up the pre-San Diego Police. They're still called San Diego City Marshals, but they wore badges that said San Diego Police, so it's a little confusing of that era. But yeah, so that's a predated it. Yes, ma'am. How do you do next?
What do you think happened with the Randolph Hearst
Oh,
killing
the
them
Thomas
on
Inns
his
case?
yacht years ago?
Yeah, the Thomas Inns case. I actually wrote about that on my website, author Steve Willard in the Crime Files. You might know that story. Thomas Ince was a movie producer, one of the biggest in Hollywood. He formed his own studios, things like that. He was on a yacht, and everyone knows the name William Randolph Hearst. He was on the yacht as well, and in the dark from a distance, he might have looked like Charlie Chaplin, and Charlie Chaplin was on the boat as well. And then William Randolph Hearst had a mistress named Marion Davies, and who was also a big Hollywood starlet. And somehow Thomas Ince turned up dead. And there's some stories that say he died of food poisoning. There's other stories that said he died of lead poisoning. I said he got shot. William Randolph Hearst probably shot him. He was unloaded in San Diego, and they got rid of everything. Everything went away real quick. Given the time period in 1924, it is highly likely that the police department covered the whole thing up. We were a much different department then, and things like that we would probably have looked the other way on, just given the power brokers involved. One of the more interesting things, everybody know the name Jerry Sanders, right?
Oh, yeah.
Jerry Sanders is my academy lieutenant, and over the years, we were kind of back and forth trying to dig at one another. So when he was elected mayor, he said, I'm the first police chief to ever become mayor. I know you weren't, you're the second, because in 1935, a guy named Percy Benbow was the first chief of police to become mayor, and he became mayor when the sitting mayor resigned, sound familiar, Dick Murphy, after being involved in a hit-and-run accident, and unfortunately the chief was an at-will employee, he got looked the other way, and the newspaper wouldn't let it go, and that drove the mayor out of office. But yeah, so probably that's what happened. There's not a lot of documentation on that whole thing, as you all imagine either. Yes?
Why is there a police department and a sheriff?
That's a good question, yeah. Police and sheriffs by law do different things. The sheriff handles mainly courts and civil processes and jails. And they can also do law enforcement, which they do. And they are covered the whole county. A police department is in the city. In some areas like Las Vegas, would probably be the closest example, have both. It's all one department. They have a sheriff who's in charge of Las Vegas Metropolitan Police, and they go over Clark County. Why we have it here, it's always been that way. In most areas it is, for a variety of reasons. I think we wear nicer uniforms than they do. So the truth is that, could we exist as one? Yeah, we probably could, but for a variety of reasons we don't. So, you have a question, sir?
Yeah, when I moved here in 1985, downtown was super rough. Like,
Oh,
when
yes,
I
it was.
was down there,
Yeah.
I was a teenager. Can you tell me, or tell us a little bit about how that all got cleaned up down there?
Yeah, pretty much Orton Plaza. I mean, if you wanted just two words, and Pete Wilson was kind of a grand visionary, him and Ernie Hahn, and at the time, I remember a lot of the things they were completely insane. But their idea was if we build this grand mall where people would kind of come to visit, it would start to drive up property values. Sort of like the same arguments used for the ballpark in the late 90s. And the idea was we'll start pushing a lot of these businesses out. And one of the things that the police department has subscribed to has sort of gotten away from a lot of agencies as well, is called the broken window theory. Meaning that if you have a house on a block that's abandoned and somebody breaks a window and it sits there as a dilapidated eyesore, other people come out and break the windows as well, and then other things will start to happen. It's sort of like one little cell of cancer becomes other areas. So same thing, so we did it in reverse. So we started driving up the property values, people started coming down, other businesses started to open up. Some of the sleazier businesses, the massage parlors, the real cheap liquor stores, some of the arcades started to go away. It also helped too that the police department joined up with the Navy to crack down a lot of wayward sailors. A lot of the sailors are coming into port, being what sailors do, they get off the boat, they want to drink, and there's lots of businesses that would cater to them. So when the military started holding their members more accountable, that played a factor as well. So a combination of a whole lot of things.
Steve, where's your museum and public access?
Yeah, 4710 College Avenue to College and Adams. That's one of the things about museums, and if you run a museum, which you do, you know, the most important thing is like in real estate, location, location, location. And with us, we're in an old city library over at College and Adams. We're too small where we're at. We're grateful to have a place. Ideally, where we should be is in the old police headquarters. And everybody familiar with that over by Seaport Village. That was our home from 1939 to 1987. That's actually where I got my start. And I'm one of the few still on STPD that actually worked in that building. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, rent factors aren't going to allow us to be there now, but we don't give up. At one time, it was a 100% done deal, that building was coming down. So we formed our association. It was to save the building and establish a museum. So we did both. And what we wanted to do was to save the building and be established in that as a museum, but that didn't work out. I say yet, I'm optimistic. That's where we're at for now.
Public access?
There's public access open Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, noon to 4, Saturday, 12 to 2. And all that's on the website as well, so you don't need to be taking copious notes. Just remember sdpolicemuseum.com and you can come down and visit. Also, if you go onto our website, check out our historic fleet as well. We have the largest fleet of historic police vehicles in the United States for sure, probably in the world. We have well over 20 vehicles dating back to the 1920s all the way up to modern times. And it's kind of interesting, and I'm sure anybody who does nuts and bolts of historical society sometimes find the law and what you want to do kind of collide. And I saw a thing on Brian Mainshine's name up here, and this is a story involving him. But we wanted to get a donation of a black and white police car that's being retired out of the fleet. And we've had a bunch of them, and somebody at the city attorney's office says, wait a minute, there's a vehicle code section that says the only people that own a police car, not that aren't a police agency, are movie companies and funeral companies. Museums can't own it. It's like, okay, you're gonna have a real problem here because the Reagan Library's got some, and all up and down the state of California. They said, well, we're sorry, unless you can change the law, you can't have it. So it's all right. So I called up Brian Mainshine. I said, hey, Brian, I need some help. And Brian's an old friend. He said, okay, I'll help you out. Ultimately, we changed the law. But it was kind of an interesting thing along the way, because at first the CHP said, no, we don't want anybody owning a police car other than, you know, what's already written. We said, well, that's interesting, because at your police museum, you're in violation of your law. That changed really quick. So, and the truth is, they didn't know. I'm not trying to make fun of the CHP, but when I called up there to find out they had cars, the guy I had talked to goes, I've been a highway patrolman for 34 years. I never heard that in my life. He looked it up and goes, oh my God, we're in trouble. So we did get the law changed.
Do any of those cars have bullet holes in it?
They don't. And you know, one of the things too, our worst enemy in our museum is the clock and the trash can. People just get rid of that type of stuff. We don't have a lot of cars that get shot at anyway because we shoot back. So most people really aren't brave enough to shoot at police, thank God. Because I mean, it's dangerous enough as it is. But the LA Police Museum has one of those. If you remember the North Hollywood shootout in 1990, I think it was 97, 98. Yeah. In one part of it, the gun that's going down the street and a police car pulls up and this guy just peppers that car. They have that car there. And I remember when I went and saw it, I was sniffing around inside, go, if that had been me, there would have been a smell behind there. That would have scared me half to death. So, but no, we don't have anything like that.
Before 1939, where was the police headquarters? Same location?
No, it was at 700 2nd Avenue, and then prior to that, it was at 5th and G Street downtown. So it kind of moved all around. When it went from 700 2nd, it was about 5,000 square feet. They're going to move in its brand new headquarters at 100,000 square feet. And it's interesting because we found the papers, that building cost $390,000 to build. 100,000 square foot building right on the water, $390,000. Boy, what we wouldn't get for that now, right? So, but when we did that and moved into that location, they want to put everything under one roof. Training, courts, jails. We even had an emergency hospital there. That was so unique that when we petitioned to get the building put on the National Register of Historic Locations, or historic places, they qualify in 3 categories. Most places don't qualify at all, and if they do, they qualify in 1. So that was one of the things that encompassed everything. We thought that would save the building, by the way, and it turns out you can have that and still be on the National Register of Historic Vacant Lots. So that didn't save the building, it certainly helped. But yeah, when we built that, it qualified as a national landmark later.
Do you have time for one more?
I do.
We live in Pacific Beach, North Pacific Beach.
Okay.
Qualify. And we're hearing that the guardian angels are coming to help out.
Oh, geez, they've come and gone.
Have you heard about this, or do you have?
I didn't hear that. They were back and forth in the 70s, and then they left for a while, and they came back, and things like that.
Yeah.
It seems to, when you get the perception of a lot of crime, they come back. And, you know, what we tell people is,
Do
you
you,
know,
do you operate that, or how are they managed?
I don't know.
Okay.
They kind of, yeah, so they just kind of appear sometimes. Sometimes they're more organized than others. The truth is, as long as you're obeying the law, you're not getting into breaking the law to observe the law, then you're not going to have any problems. But otherwise, sometimes they can make things better, sometimes make them worse. If they're good for presence and, you know, making sure that people are behaving themselves, they call police if they're not, then that's fine. But if they're out being vigilantes, it's not fine. And they've had both incarnations at, yes.
What's a guardian angel?
They were, I think they first appeared in New York in the 70s. They wore, if I'm not mistaken, they wore like black military pants, white shirts, the guardian angels, and red berets. And they kind of started as a quasi-vigilante group. Some of them, I think, meant well, and others were getting out there and they were getting into physical altercations with criminals and stuff. And that just, the potential for horrible things going wrong just goes way up when you got people starting to, you know, confront each other like that. We have,
Not officials, they were private gangs.
I don't know if they classify the gang, but yeah, they're kind of operating on the same premises maybe. Yes, okay.
Getting back to police cars, aren't they heavily reinforced?
Some, to some degree. I mean, if they were too heavy, they would be able to move around. But the doors are with ballistic panels, but the glass is not. But shooting glass isn't as easy as you might think. Shooting a windshield, because the windshield's angled, it's a lot of times will ricochet up or it'll splinter, things like that. You don't want to get shot at, period. But they do have a little bit. But you know, at the end of the day, officers, you know, wear body armor, and sometimes bad guys get lucky.
I came in late. Did you mention the Broderick case at all?
No, you know, I didn't, and you know, interestingly enough, I actually worked on the Van Dam task force as well, so I do have a connection sort of south of here. Betty Broderick case was another domestic violence murder, a little bit more sensationalized. And actually, I wrote Dan Broderick a ticket back in the 90s, or the 80s, right before he was killed. And I remember him because his license plate was JD in MD, a Juris Doctorate and medical doctor. And we were talking to him about it. I said, "Do you have both?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, I'm a physician. I sue other physicians." I go, "Oh, you must be very popular."
No, the reason I mentioned that is because that was actually the subject of a Law and Order episode.
Right. Yeah, I know it was. And I think it was, everyone seen the show Snapped? I was on an episode of Snapped, by the way, as a domestic violence expert. But I think it was on there as well. It's been portrayed in a lot of different situations. You know, it's unfortunate because, you know, it didn't have to happen. You know, but it kind of shows you this mentality of domestic violence, whether you're male or female. With perpetrators, it's all about power and control. Because, I mean, if you look at just the cold, hard facts of it, she had a good life somewhere else. She's getting money, you know, so it wasn't an issue of I'm starving if you don't do certain things. There's a lot of ego involved. And that's a lot of the cases with domestic violence just in general, is this massive entitlement egos that led to that. Yeah, sad case. Does everybody know about that case?
So I think Steve will stay and autograph books.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to sign books. They're $20 a piece. At Barnes & Noble, they're $22, so you actually save money in taxes.
Put your badge number on your signature.
Sure, yeah.
So one other thing I forgot to mention before, if you don't already have one, our newsletter, our latest newsletter is up here, so please take one. And there's cookies and whatever. And join me in thanking Steve.